Hey everyone, welcome to Front Page Bets. Mike Savetich here with Jerry Ahern for our weekly FPB cast. And Jerry, Sweet 16 now set up for starting a Thursday, the first two rounds of the NCAA tournament in the books. A lot of upsets, especially day one. A lot of, and then going into the weekend. Both of our brackets, we talked about this last week during the tournament, texted each other. After Kentucky lost, after Iowa lost, it was just, light them on fire. But, there's still some teams alive, three number one seeds still. For me, I took all chalk in those regions to go to the Final Four. Kentucky was the only team that I didn't have, that I still don't have alive to reach the Final Four. I know you took a bath on some of these, on some of the ones early. So,
Yeah.
having the tournament, that's why they play March Madness, right? So, anybody has a chance. We're seeing that in St. Peter's, the third ever 15 seed to make the Sweet 16. We're seeing it 4 double-digit seeds in the final 16. So that's why they play the game. It's called March Madness for a reason. But how does this, the start of this tournament stack up to ones in years past? We had talked about going into the tournament how there's so much parity. You could see something crazy happen, and it looks like we're seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, my picks in the bracket might have stunk pretty bad, but I did say before the tournament this could be the most wide open one ever. And you're looking at St. Peter's, you're looking at Miami, you're looking at Iowa State, some of these teams that have advanced to the Sweet 16. I don't think anybody, regardless of level of expertise, had that going on. And in terms of historically, I think this is, right up there in terms of when you look at the overall composition of the Sweet 16 right now. Baylor getting knocked out is a surprise, but to me, not as huge a surprise as Kentucky. I think the Sweet 16 lineup is really interesting in the way that, for example, Kansas, a number one, who I thought had probably the best shot of getting knocked out, now I think probably has the best shot of the number ones of advancing. So learned a little bit over the last weekend. Hopefully learned a little bit more that's actionable for this weekend, but we'll see. It's March Madness indeed.
Yeah, and I will take credit. I did call. I didn't pick it in my bracket, but I did call UNC knocking off Baylor. I wasn't convinced that Baylor was the number one, the best number one seed out there. Obviously, I didn't think they would go far in the tournament. Injuries, just the way they kind of played during the year, inconsistent. I had actually St. Mary's advancing, out of that round, beating Baylor in the Sweet 16. But now that you have, UCLA and UNC, you kind of have some of those old school blue bloods, those power programs from years past playing each other. I think UNC right now, and I said this, after they beat Duke in the regular season finale, if they can play like that, they're one of the toughest teams to beat. You got Baycott, you've got a lot of great players around that team that it's not all have to be Baycott, right? And he plays well, and he's getting averaging double doubles. They're going to be good. But when you get other players coming in and starting to score and carry the load, I think UNC is a really tough team. And so, I'll call that. You obviously still have Duke alive, with K's last, stand, kind of going through the last dance, the way they played Michigan State, not the sexiest of wins, but they got it done. That they have talent when they're clicking on all cylinders too. So you got two ACC teams that are making a run. And speaking of ACC teams, you have Miami. There's some blue bloods, but there's also some, some of those teams that are, maybe in the middle of the road and they get up there. I'm interested to see how this is going to play out as it goes forward when it comes to some of these programs that have been there, done that, and some of these upstart programs. Maybe not upstarts in the case of, they're just fresh on the scene, but you got a Miami team with a great coach who took George Mason to the Final Four years ago. And Larinaga, how is he going to be able to get his team ready to play in the Sweet 16? So there's a lot of storylines, a lot of coaching storyline as well. You got Hubert Davis in his first Sweet 16 with UNC, longtime assistant coach there at the Tar Heels. So, we'll talk about the elephant in the room here in a little bit, but impressions of some of these coaches, some of these guys have been there before, done that. Are they going to be able to get their teams ready to go at this stage of the tournament?
Well, let's start with Carolina. And I think the only person or thing that can stop Carolina seems to be the officiating. And officiating has been an overwhelming influence on this tournament. I mean, Iowa went to the free throw line 2 times in their loss. That's impossible. Murray got fouled on that three that would have tied the game. The ball gets halfway to the basket. His arm gets chopped off. No call. Unbelievable. The Illinois kid gets a tech for hanging on the rim. I mean, let the guys play, for God's sakes. I mean, I am not one generally to criticize officiating. I know it's a tough job. I know these guys aren't even full-time on the gig, but come on. I mean, have some sense for flow of the game. So that's my rant to start with. But, in terms of, other storylines, I mean, who had 3 ACC teams in the Sweet 16? Not me.
Not after that year. Not after they only had 5 teams make the tournament.
Who had only 2 Big Ten teams in? Not me. And I'll tell you what, the 2 that are in are not the 2 that I thought would be in by any chance. 3 Big 12 teams. I mean, again, kind of a surprise. So there's a lot of subplots to this thing. You mentioned coaching. Coaching definitely matters. I mean, we saw, an all-time heavyweight slugfest between Duke and Michigan State along the coaching lines on Sunday. And, those guys really have such an influence when you look at the timeouts and the sets that are called off of set plays at the end of games. I mean, that was a master class in coaching, and Kay really came through against Izzo, who to me is as good as anybody. And, he's hasn't had the success in March of late that he's had historically, but the guy's been in the Final Four 6 times. You think about coaching and experience and what's left. Bill Self. I mean, he's been there before. He used to be a guy who had the rap of not being able to get over the hump. I don't think that's the case anymore. You mentioned Larinaga. Jay Wright, 2 national championships, both of recent vintage. Another guy who used to have the rap of not being able to get over the top. So, and Mick Cronin at UCLA is another guy who, took an okay UCLA team out of the first 4 to the Final Four last year. So there are a lot of coaches I think that are going to have a big impact here. None, less than Kay. And I still believe that, to steal from Joe Sullivan, the Hallmark movie ending is pretty likely. I saw that a guy in New Jersey yesterday put down $300K on Duke to win it all, to win, with 17-1 odds to win 5.1 million. I don't have that kind of cake myself, but I mean, I do think he's right.
It's gonna be interesting. You mentioned coaches though too. 2 first-year coaches in Davis at UNC, and then Tommy Lloyd at Arizona, with only 3 coaches in his first year to take a team to a number 1 seed in the tournament, and they're looking pretty good after that overtime win at TCU. Juwan Howard at Michigan. I said Michigan didn't even belong in the tournament. 17 wins, 11 losses, or some. What did they start at? Yeah, 17-14 record, making the NCAA tournament. We know what happened to Juwan and Michigan at the end of the regular season, being suspended for the last 5 games. But then they go out and beat Tennessee
without their point guard, without Devontae Jones. With Frankie Collins, a freshman, coming in and leading the way. I mean, Michigan's got some talent. I mean, don't forget, they were a preseason top 5 team that had some struggles, particularly defensively, that had some injuries, that had some COVID issues. They're a good basketball team. Juwan Howard is a good coach, not quite in the same vintage or breadth with some of the guys we just talked about in terms of Final Four pedigree, but certainly a guy who could make an impact.
Yeah, and I tell you what, that team, that at this point in the season, records out the window. Who's hot? Who's got the best coaching? Who's got the best players? You talk about Villanova and Jay Wright, and then you got Gillespie, probably one of the most decorated Big East players, and that kid's been around. So, you add some coaches in with some of these guys that have been there, done that, and have ice in their veins. This could be, a Sweet 16 to remember. And it already is in some ways with St. Peter's. I'm going to talk about the Peacocks out of Jersey City. This is a team that, again, nobody gave them any chance. And why would they, right? A 15 seed, you win your tournament, you get the automatic bid, then you face Kentucky in the first round. Okay, this is a walkover for Kentucky, and it's over. They beat the Wildcats. Then they go, okay, Murray State. That's a dangerous team. You say, okay, this is a team that went undefeated in their conference, and they beat them. And not only, they beat them by 10. So you get now a team like St. Peter's who's got the swag. Their Coach Holloway, talking about how they're not intimidated. These are kids that are from New Jersey, from New York City. They've been in tough situations in their lives, and then also on the court. I'm not saying they beat Purdue, but At this time too, everybody loves a Cinderella, and this is probably the biggest one that we've seen since Oral Roberts last year, and then you had Florida Gulf Coast, the only other two teams to make the Sweet 16 as 15 seeds. St. Peter's makes it number 3.
Well, I mean, they're not scared. I mean, they already beat Kentucky, arguably the best team in the tournament. Purdue is a heck of a basketball team. They were number 1 for part of the season this year. They do have some defensive lapses, and I think that makes it an interesting matchup. I got Purdue taking that one and sort of ending the dream for the Peacocks, but heck of a run, especially the way that it sort of came together. As you mentioned, if had they not won their conference tournament, and they got the break of not having to play Iona, the best team in their conference tournament. We're not even talking about St. Peter's, but the Boilers are legit, and they could find themselves moving along from that one and probably losing the next one to UCLA and Mick Cronin.
It could be, that bracket out of all of them has, because it doesn't have the number 1 seed or the number 2 seed left. So Baylor's the highest seed there. That bracket out of the East, I mean, you could see conceivably any of those 4 teams. You still got Gonzaga, leading that bracket in the West. They'll have Duke. I got in the regional final. I know you've got Duke. I've got Gonzaga to win it all. You've got Duke to win it all. But then you look at Arizona. And what about Houston? We haven't even talked about Houston. Probably the best 5 seed to ever play. I mean, these guys they incredible. Made it to the Sweet 16 last year. What Sampson's doing there has been, we didn't even talk about that game against Arizona, with Arizona getting scared against TCU. But yeah. You said earlier in the Midwest, you got Kansas, probably a team that is the top number 1 seed, maybe the way that they're playing. There's a lot to shake out. There's a lot still to shake out. So who do you see going into the Final Four? Obviously you still like Duke, but where are we at now that our bracket's already burned up and gone, starting fresh? Who do we like?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's start with the West on Thursday. Texas Tech, Duke, obviously I got the Dukies coming away with that one. I think they win that one pretty handily after struggling a little bit with, not the greatest Michigan State team ever, but a team that played one of its better games of the season. And you mentioned Arkansas and Gonzaga. I'm in love with Arkansas. I think, Note is a great, great player. They've got some supporting cast there. They've got another coach who I think is an up-and-comer, or maybe he's a little beyond that now, in Eric Musselman. But I got Gonzaga getting knocked out there. And then ultimately, I got Duke coming away from that one and getting to the Final Four. In the Midwest also, Thursday, you got Michigan and Villanova. I like Jay Wright and the Cats. You mentioned Gillespie. Villanova just finds a way to find the open man and take advantage of when teams are doubling and triple teaming people. And Gillespie goes a long way into doing that, but that's just a smart basketball team. Then you got Houston and Arizona. Houston and Kelvin Sampson will give them a run. I think their role ends with that. And I think Arizona kind of bounces back a little bit and shows a little bit more than they did in the scare and the OT game the other night. And then I got Villanova as coming out of that ultimately as being your Final Four team. And then East on Friday, the Peacocks, the mighty Peacocks, and the Boilers. I'm going with Matt Painter, who I think is another underrated coach, who's got some big guys who make plays. If they can avoid defensive lapses, they win that one going away. I'm going to go against your Carolina Tar Heels with UCLA, Juzang and company. That's a Final Four tested team that I think has come together at the right time and has sort of flown under the radar, as we talked about a lot of other teams there. So I've got the Bruins going from that matchup with Purdue into the Final Four. And then Midwest, boy, Iowa State is a tough team to watch. That Wisconsin-Iowa State game, someone called it a rock fight. I think that was an insult to rock fights. It was just brutal. But give them credit. It's like Greg Campy, the coach of Oakland University, once, described a team's defense as like, a third grade basketball game where you just sort of run at the guy and you try to get him to make a mistake. That's kind of what it looks like Iowa State's doing, but it's working. They've got the Canes and Larinaga. I got to go with Miami there. And then, the Providence Friars, Ed Cooley and company against self and the Jayhawks. I previously in my esteemed bracket had Kansas losing in that round in that game, but I got to go with Kansas there. I think Providence has had a really nice year, marred a little bit by the fact that they didn't have to play Villanova because of some COVID issues and some scheduling things. But I mean, good team, not to take anything away from them, but I think Kansas is the cream of the crop there. So Villanova and KU advancing to the 4 there, and that's the way I see it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the bracket that I had, and then now what's left of it. A lot of scratches out, a lot of ink on it. But I still think Gonzaga. I think that Gonzaga Duke game. Duke gets past Texas Tech. I do like Arkansas. I think they're phenomenally talented and athletic. I just, Gonzaga has that. I think if anybody left, that can finish off teams when needed. That Gonzaga.
I don't disagree. I mean, I think that'll be a tight one.
Yeah. That Gonzaga Duke game, at least for me, in the West Final, could be the national championship game. To be honest, I mean that could be that the winner of that could go all the way. I've got, I would love to say St. Peter's go, but I think you're right, Purdue. I like UNC. I'm gonna stick with UNC in that bracket. And I really want to see how those two teams play each other to see, how UNC comes out of that game against UCLA. And if they're still playing well, I like them to get through. Arizona, I've got taking that bracket. I tell you what, Houston, scary team. I think Michigan's magic runs out. Villanova, again, when you got a guy like a 6-year senior or a 15-year senior like Gillespie, however long he's been around, with Jay Wright being in this situation recently, I do like that. But I think Arizona's playing well enough. And then coming out, I still have Kansas. Miami's scary. Providence, I think they go down to Kansas. I think Miami, with all 5 guys that can handle the ball and move around and being able to play the way they handled Auburn was just, they didn't even let, Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler get even in the game, let alone be a threat. And I really like that Miami team, but I think Kansas right now is playing some good basketball with Bill Self. So that's who I got coming out.
UNC blowing that 25-point lead doesn't bother you?
I think that, you mentioned the help from the refs. I mean, Baycott's got to make
but the refs weren't worth 25 there, unlike the Iowa game where that was just like ridiculous.
Right. It was, that does give me some pause, but we're going to, we'll overlook that. It's because it's basketball. There's always a run in a team. There's 3 runs in each game, and that just happened to be all 3 put together in one to erase that 25-point lead. But we'll have all this and more on Front Page Bets this week. We'll break down each game going into the Sweet 16, or at least our best bets, and then we'll go into the Elite 8 next week. Obviously, we'll have the Final Four, so we'll be back with our FPB cast next week. And we'll also be able to, kind of have a little bit more understanding of where we're going, what teams are still left, and we'll have all that for you at Front Page Bets. Jerry, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time.